Nikki Haley, great to see you. Congratulations.
Thank you so much for being here.
Well, it's a great day.
It's always a great day in South Carolina, so I'm thrilled you could see it and feel it for yourself.
Well, and this day may be even better, specifically not just for you, but for the country, the way you see it. Tell me a little bit about what stands out. How do you stand out from a field that will get, there'll be more volume in this field?
You know, I've never been in Washington, and I think that's so much of the problem in this country. We have so many Washington insiders trying to tell the American people what to think and what to feel. You saw here what Americans think and feel. What they know is they're worried about the fact that they can no longer afford their groceries. They're worried about the fact that their children are so far behind in school they don't know how to catch them up. They're worried about the fact that, you know, you've got an open border and crime on their streets and you shouldn't have to worry about your child riding their bike down the street. They're worried about the fact that we looked up at the sky and saw a Chinese spy balloon. You can't make this up. And Americans have been through a lot. They've been through a lot with COVID and with everything else. They want someone to listen. And they're tired of the status quo and they want a new generation. They want a fighter. They want someone who gets them. And I get that.
Mm-hmm. Why a new generation? Talk to me a little bit about that. You say term limits. You mentioned mental competency tests. You really hammered that theme. Why do you believe it's time for that new generation now? Because we have seen quite a few old politicians or older politicians.
I have, from the time I was governor, fought for term limits. I believe it's hugely important. We have to have them in government. Elected officials should come, do their job, and leave and let fresh blood come in. That hasn't happened. And so we have to have term limits in Congress. But more than that, look at who we're up against. Joe Biden has been in DC 50 years. He's out of touch. He has no concept of what my daughter's going through, where she just got out of college, she's getting married, and they want to know if they can afford a home. They have no clue about my son who's in college and has to worry about what the professor thinks if he's going to get an A. They don't worry about the fact that I'm the wife of a combat veteran. And you see all of our enemies like spiraling around us, and you think about your military spouse and say, is this the time he's going to have to go? They're not listening. And so what I am saying is we need new energy, we need new blood, but we need fresh eyes coming in, not Washington people. We've had enough of that. It's time for something new, but it's time for a leader.
Yeah, for sure. And Joe Biden wants to play the record player. I remember that line. I'm like, what in the world is going on? You've listed a lot of problems in America. What is the biggest crisis, the way you see it, in America right now? How do you see that specifically? Is there one big crisis here? What is it?
The biggest crisis I see is the national self-loathing that has taken over our country. I mean, the media has really gotten to where they've told Americans our country is bad, our country is racist, our country is rotten to the core, and that's just not true. Our country is the best in the world, and we are blessed. And we don't need our kids sitting there thinking they live in a bad place. I have been all over this world, and I can tell you, and I've always said, even on our worst day, we are blessed to live in America. But it is time for everybody to come together and fight for her, because we need to know that no, America's not perfect, but the principles at the heart of America are perfect, and that's what we have to get back to.
Let me ask you about the evangelical vote, the all-important evangelical vote. Look, a Republican primary winner can't survive without a plurality, at least, of evangelical voters. What's the pitch from you to the evangelical voters who care about not just the life issue, but religious freedom, Israel? There's a lot. You check off a lot of boxes, but what is the pitch specifically to those key primary voters, the evangelicals?
So the first thing I'll tell you, there's no pitch. It is, I am who I say I am. I am a mom who is blessed because my husband was adopted, and I live with that every day. I had trouble having my children. I know how precious life is. I'm the daughter of Indian immigrants who told us every day that the best way to appreciate God's blessings is to give back. You know, I am the wife of a combat veteran, and I know what it's like when you send your husband off and you don't know if he's going to come back. And every day I have had to focus on how do we make today better than yesterday, and you can't do it without faith. And that was tested when we had the Mother Emanuel shooting. It was tested in a way like I've never had it tested. And at my lowest low, I remember trying to wrap my arms around the state and protect her from chaos and riots, but comfort these families that had just lost so much. And I remember saying, God, I can't do this by myself. And He was there. And so I am a person that every day walks with my faith on my shoulder and knows that I can't get through a day without God. And so I don't need to pitch anyone. I think they see it. I think they feel it. I think they know who I am. And I think at the end of the day, Americans are like that. America's not rotten. America's blessed. We've got good people who have faith, who understand. It's going to take all of us. It's going to take all of us to get back to the strength that we had as Americans.
You are a strong woman of faith. You don't necessarily, as much as other politicians, wear it on your sleeve as much. So you did convert to Christianity. You grew up in the Sikh faith. Tell me a little bit more about that. Like, why the change? What did Jesus, if you will, have to offer that was different the way you saw it? And how did your parents react, by the way? Because that must be a fly on the wall for that conversation. It might have been interesting.
So, it's interesting. When I was growing up in that small rural town, my parents would take us to different churches all the time. A Catholic church, a Methodist church, a Baptist church, and they would bring us home and say, we want you to see everybody has their way to God. And what's most important is that you find your path to God and that you understand that that is who you are and what you need in your life. And so for them, it wasn't an issue of them not handling it well. What happened is, growing up in the Sikh faith, I would go to the temple and you could feel the spirit of everybody around, but I couldn't understand it. I didn't speak the language. I couldn't understand it. I knew the importance of God. Our parents would teach us about it every day, like you have to, live a life of God, you got to live a life of service, all of those things. And so then when I started going to church with Michael, I didn't just feel it, I heard it. And when you hear that, and you hear how blessed, and you hear all of the things that suddenly you craved for, that's what did it. And so it was easy for me to convert because I had been looking for it for so long. And when I found it, I just knew. Yeah,
that's great. Let me ask you about the abortion issue real quick. You mentioned Michael and being adopted, and of course some of the troubles you had regarding the kids starting out here. What about the GOP specifically as it relates to how they navigate a post-Dobbs world on abortion? How do you see that exactly? Because there is a sense that there's an ostrich strategy that should not be taken up. In other words, not burying your head in the sand about this. And Democrats capitalized in the midterms to a degree on that. So how do you see that? And talk to me a little bit about how states should decide, or what the role of the federal government is, all of that, the whole kit and caboodle.
Well, Democrats shouldn't capitalize it anymore, and we've got to take care of that. We should never be afraid to talk about what we think on the pro-life issue. I'm pro-life not because Republican Party tells me to be. I'm pro-life from my experiences, from having my husband adopted, from having trouble having my children. So it's personal for me. But guess what? It's personal for everyone, not just women. It's personal for men too. And we have to treat it like that. We didn't want unelected justices deciding something this personal. We wanted it decided with the people. And so now I think it's back in the hands of the people. We can now do it through elected officials. What we have to understand is, I don't judge someone if they are pro-choice, but I don't want them judging me for being pro-life. What we do need to do is be able to have this conversation. And my number one goal is we should save as many babies as we can and support as many moms as we can. And we should do it with love, and we should do it in a way that we can have that conversation. Now, they can have the debate on whether that means 15 weeks or 10 weeks or 6 weeks, but let's at least start with the fact that we don't think that abortions up until the time of birth is acceptable. And let's accept the fact that we do want to save as many babies as possible, and then go from there.
Is that a soapbox issue for you? When I say that, I mean that's something that's important to you as it relates to a soapbox issue, and what the federal government's role in that should be, or do you believe that's just a state issue at this point?
I think it's important to me because I think it's important to Americans. This issue isn't going to go away based on a president. This issue is going to affect every family. And so what we have to do is we have to be very loving in the way we do this, but we also have to figure out that we've got to figure this out. So let's do it. And so, if the federal government decides to do it, if the states decide to do it, Our goal should be to save as many babies as we can and come to a consensus on what that looks like.
The culture has gone to you know what in a handbasket here. I mean, we got drag shows for kids. We've got the LGBT curriculum, so to speak, being taught to elementary schoolers, or at least books in that vein. What do you make of what's happening? Because Christians, many evangelicals see this as a spiritual battle of what's taking place in our country today. Spiritual warfare.
It absolutely is spiritual warfare, because you are trying to take parenting away from parents and you're trying to give it to other people. We can't have that happen. And you know, it was very interesting when Florida passed the Don't Say Gay bill. You know, it was basically you can't talk about gender up until the time of third grade. I didn't think that went strong enough. I mean, when I was growing up, you didn't have sex ed until 7th grade, and your parents had to sign, and my dad wouldn't sign. I was the kid in the back room that couldn't go because my parents were like, no, you're not gonna do this yet. This is about parents and their children. This is not about school bureaucrats. This is not about people in DC. This is about parents and children and their church. And all of those issues need to be decided at home. They don't need to be talked about in schools. They don't need to be spread here. I mean, all of this wokeism is trying to change the core of what the family is. The family has always been one that prays at home, goes to church, teaches morals, grows their children, and sends them out to do God's work. That's always been the case until now. And now they're going to have the nerve to say that parents don't know how to raise their children? That's unacceptable. Parents do know how to raise their children. They do know what school they should go into and should be able to decide that for themselves. They do know when their children need to be talked to about genders. They do know how to handle their children. And we need to let parents do their job.
Yeah, for sure. Donald Trump, got to ask you the Trump question, if you will, in air quotes. You had said at one point, obviously, that you would not run if he did. He's running. You are running too. You had a conversation with him about it. To walk us through that a little bit, and I call it a change of heart. Maybe it's not a change of heart. You tell me what it is exactly as to what the difference was then compared to now.
Of course. So when I first said I wouldn't run against President Trump, Biden had just been elected. And since then, I've watched Afghanistan fall and us lose 13 American soldiers. I've sat there and watched all of this chaos happen in our schools and what's happening to our children. I've watched inflation go through the roof. And then I saw us lose the midterms. David, we have lost the last 7 out of 8 popular votes for president. Republicans are doing something wrong. We have to accept that. There's no reason we don't win a majority of Americans. Our issues and solutions are the right ones. We focus on lifting up everybody, not just certain people, but we have to know how to talk about it. This is a story of addition. We need to bring people into the fold. We need people to join us as we go and try and save America from socialism and defeatism. And we need to do it together. And so, one, I think it's time for a new generation. I think it's time for someone who can speak that in a way that we bring more people in. And I think it's time that we focus on the fact that we can't keep talking about old issues and the status quo. We've got to look forward. We've got to get back to where we're a country that loves America. I had a conversation with President Trump. He is a friend. I thought that he was the right president at the right time. He broke all the right things and kind of built them back up. And I will always be happy that I was a part of that. But we have to go in a different direction. It is time for a new generation, and I told him that. And we had a great conversation, and everything went, it was like we always have, but he knows that I have always said the truth. I said it to him in the administration, I say it now. And it's time. But we had a great conversation.
Just today, on the day that you're announcing, they're already putting out some Oppo research from the Trump campaign. How are you going to handle that part of it?
I am running against Joe Biden. I don't kick to the side, I kick forward. Joe Biden is the biggest problem we have in this country. And Joe Biden's where we need to keep our eye on the ball. That's what I'm going to do. They can say whatever they want. It rolls off of me with no issues. Because at the end of the day, the American people don't want that. They want someone who is listening and fighting for their issues and telling Joe Biden, you have a spending addiction and you have sent us into inflation. We have supply chain problems and we should be building these things at home, and our Americans should be working in these jobs. We have to close our border and our streets need to be safe. And we've got to stop these spy balloons and all of these threats that are coming in from around the world. And we have to have a strong military, because a strong military prevents wars, it doesn't start wars. But we've got to start getting our eye on the ball and focus. We look so distracted right now.
Yeah. The future of the Republican Party, how do you see it? Because, I mean, I'm going to put on my political analytical cap, if you will, which is that, look, if you were running in 1984 and Reaganism and 94, the Tea Party changed stuff in 2010. Trump came along. It's a lot more populist today. It's different. It's a different party than it was under Reagan. But you have more of an I'll let you determine how you want, but more of an interventionist, a kind of a hawkish approach, maybe to foreign policy. Ukraine is a good example of that. So how do you maneuver? How are you going to maneuver? Because you need some of that MAGA crowd to come with you to get the nomination. You're going to need to tap into that somehow. How do you do that and appeal to the populist strain? And it's not even a strain, it's a growing strain within the Republican Party.
I mean, I think you saw a lot of them here today. Americans just want to know that we are going to focus on America first. We absolutely should. When I was at the United Nations, and President Trump would say America first, other countries would come to me and say, well, what else do they want you to have first? Why wouldn't it be America first? Because it's France first. It's Russia first. They all do that. We need to, if we don't take care of our home base, we can't take care of anything else. And so that needs to be the focus. It's one of the reasons when we were moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and we got all that hate at the UN. When I left, after that vote, I went back to my office and I said, I want you to do a book. I want you to list all 193 countries. I want the second column to be the percentage of times they voted with America and against America. And I want the third column to be the amount of foreign aid we give them. I took that book and I gave it to President Trump. And I said, we can no longer buy friends. You will never win them. Stop giving money to people who say death to America, death to Israel. Let's start finding who's our partner, our real partner. And so what you have to do is we need to step back and understand you don't need to buy a bunch of friends. You need a strong military to prevent wars. But you know what? We have the backs of our friends and we hold our enemies to account. And whether it's Ukraine or Israel, we take care of them because it's about freedom. And we can never stop fighting for freedom.
There is that populist strain and a lot of MAGA that wants the Ukraine gravy train, financially and otherwise, to stop. And even there's a growing Republican growing Republican support to say, wait a minute, checks and balances here. What are we doing giving all this money to Ukraine? Where do you come down on the money, on the military, whether it be fighter jets, X, Y, and Z?
Biden was slow to the take. Yeah. He should have given Ukraine what they needed right when this started, and we'd be in a totally different place right now. This isn't a war about Ukraine. This is a war about freedom. And I don't think we need to put troops on the ground. I don't think we need to write them blank checks. But they have the passion to fight for their own freedom. Give them the ammunition to do it. Get with our NATO allies and say, hey, we're not the only ones. You've got to do it too. And let them win this fight. But I'll tell you what, if they win this fight, you won't hear anything from Russia, China, or Iran. If they lose this fight, Russia's not going to stop at Ukraine. They're going to go into Poland and the Baltics, and we've got a world war on our hands. We have to make sure we send a message to every enemy that if you mess with our friends, you're messing with us, and you don't want to do that.
And that, therefore, is America first, in essence.
It is taking care of America because we're preventing wars.
Right, for sure. On the globalization issue, real quick, because you had a kind of a front row seat to some of the world actors here, the World Economic Forum, the Klaus Schwabs, the Davos crowd, if you will. What do you make of them? Because there's a lot of folks, back to the populist MAGA strain, who say, wait a minute, they're coming up with some goofy technology here. They're into globalization. There's been a lot of concerns about that Davos crowd. They want to lump you in there. They want to say maybe you're a globalist. How do you react to? I mean, in other words, the World Economic Forum people. What do you make of that?
It's a bunch of elitists. It's a bunch of elitists that have no idea what real Americans are going through, and they want to go and dictate to all of us how they think things should be. They think that everything needs to be green energy. They think that we need to focus on the climate. They think that we need to have everybody masked up and schools closed. They are completely out of touch. And I will tell you from someone at the United Nations, It was a complete farce, and I called it out every single time. Because at the end of the day, they wanted these big initiatives, and they wanted America to do it. No, if you want the initiatives, you do it. We're going to do what we want to do. And I think we have to always remember that.
The role of the federal government, how do you see it? What is the role of the federal government, the way you see it?
Under Joe Biden's America, the role of the federal government has grown, and there's trillion-dollar bills constantly that are continuing to grow it. What we want the role of the federal government is to get out of the lives of Americans, get out of the lives of small businesses, and make sure they understand that government breaks more than it fixes. Let the private sector do, let real Americans do, let us be free to make decisions, to make our choices. Capitalism, economic freedom, it has lifted up more people out of poverty in the history of the world. We should never be ashamed to say that. And we need to go back to that and let parents be in control, let Americans be in control, and remember what it's like to be a free and proud American.
Speaking of the role of the government, COVID and the mandates and the masks, I say even looking back, as president, you're running for president, what would have been, how would you have handled that basically? I
would have handled that just like when I was governor and had hurricanes and we had a 1,000-year flood. I would go in front of South Carolinians every day. I would tell them what we knew, what we didn't know, and what we thought was the best situation going forward. And I stayed in touch with them every day and let them make decisions. I didn't tell them how to live. I gave them the information so that they could make the choices on how to live. That's not the role of government. Government doesn't need to be all things to all people. Government was there to secure the rights and freedoms of the people. That's it. That's it. And no more than that.
On COVID, on the vaccines, real quick, there's mounting evidence now, even from the NIH, but more. But anyhow, bottom line is there's a lot mounting evidence and research that shows that these vaccines might not be as safe as a lot of people once thought. What is your view on what's happening in terms of vaccine safety?
I mean, they scared people into thinking they had to get a vaccine. They scared people into thinking they had to close schools. They scared businesses into shutting down. And all they did was make our country more unhealthy because they didn't allow people to live. At the end of the day, if a small business wants to open, they should have the freedom to open. And if a customer wants to walk in that business, they should have the freedom to walk in there. If parents want their children to go to school, they should be able to send them. And the child shouldn't have to be in a mask to do that. Because guess what? Elementary school kids learn by facial expressions. And now you see all of these mental health challenges that we have for so many of our children. And it's because of all those experts that claim that they knew best. And that should be a lesson to us to never let that happen.
I have two last questions. John Hagee today said the opening prayer. What was that moment like for you? And tell me about your relationship with him. He's a very influential evangelical figure.
Pastor John and Diana Hagee are treasures. They are true treasures. Michael and I traveled to Israel with them. He has developed this mass network of Christians United for Israel. He is loved in Israel. He's loved in America. And I went to him when I decided I was going to run. And I wanted him here to bless this day. And boy, did he bless it.
Yeah. And it kind of, I don't want to say sent a message, not that there was anything necessarily overt about it, but God in Israel. I mean, that represents a lot about what you are about. God, Israel, and the Judeo-Christian fabric of this country. Is that the way you see it?
Yes, and we don't need to go away from that. We need to dig deep. We need to pull into that.
Double down, if you will.
Absolutely, and that's why I wanted him to be here, because I knew he'd set the tone like nobody else.
Yeah, as we finally wrap up, where does it go from here? How do you see the race? What do you need to do to win? I mean, if you can give me kind of a tactical answer, what needs to fall right for you? I can ask that same question to Trump or maybe Pompeo or DeSantis, whoever ends up getting the race. But for you specifically, what do you need to convince Americans about?
I want Americans to know they deserve better. They deserve better than the life they have. Our kids deserve a future they can be proud of. We deserve a country that is strong and proud, and I need them to join me in this. This is a movement. This is a movement to right the ship. This is a movement to say we deserve better, but we're all going to be a part of this. And we need to all be united in doing that. That doesn't mean we compromise. That doesn't mean we take the weak way out. It means we're bold, We don't apologize for our love, and we go through forward. And if they want to join this movement, tell them to go to NikkiHaley.com, because we're going to do this. We're going to finish it, and we're going to end up doing this in a way that make all Americans proud.
And when you need to wear heels, you'll wear heels.
I will wear heels. They've done me well up until now.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.